Okay, welcome back to another author interview at Crystal Lake. And today our guest is Andrew Van Wey. I hope I pronounced that right.
You got it.
Um,
Perfect.
and we are going to be discussing his novella in the Dark Tide 19 anthology, What Swallows the Light. And now I'm going to turn it over to him and let him introduce himself. So take it away.
Hi, I'm Andrew Van Wey. It's nice to meet you, and thanks for having me on. So, yeah, my novella is Dark Matter Dreams. It is in the gorgeous book, What Swallows the Light. It's an anthology with two other authors, myself, Gage Greenwood, and John Durgin. We're tackling the subject of alien horror. And it's a really fun anthology because all of us take a very different approach to alien horror. Some of us stay a little more grounded, and some of us shoot for the stars and really lean into the sci-fi element of it. But all of it features some good alien gooiness.
Oh, that's a nice tagline. Alien gooiness.
Oh, yeah.
So give everyone an overview of what your novella is about.
So my novella, Dark Matter Dreams. Wow, that's really a tough way to sort of nutshell it, as my wife would say. But it's basically like if you took Stranger Things, Fire in the Sky, A Nightmare on Elm Street, Alien, and a little bit of Ancient Aliens, and threw it all in a blender, and then just poured it into a smoothie and drank it with a nice shot of rum on the side. Because it's a story about a group of aliens that are known as the Greys, sort of like we've known them, but they are coming back to study a family, the Greenberg family, who they've done a multi generational study on. And as they are taking the Greenberg family up into their ship to study them, as they've done every 12 to 15 years for the last 50 to 60 years, something else gets on board their ship as well. And you'll have to read to figure out what gets on their ship. But it's a multi point of view novella that really leans into the perspective of what would it be like to abduct a family and to do research on them, and what would happen if something went wrong.
Oh, that sounds very intriguing. So, what were the inspirations behind your story, and how did you narrow down the sci-fi elements you wanted to incorporate?
Oh, yeah, so the inspiration was a lot of stuff. Grew up, I'm a Gen Xer, so I grew up watching the X-Files, Outer Limits, all sorts of all sorts of alien stuff. It was just something that, as a kid, was always in the background. Science fiction has always abutted against horror for me. There's always kind of been, Plan 9 from outer space, or, just all sorts of invaders from Mars, things like that, that have been sci-fi, but have had elements of the scary and the otherworldly in them. So my inspiration for this was I wanted to kind of see what it would look like for a blue collar group of aliens who have essentially been Jane Goodall like in their study of humans for, generations. And they've got shorthand with each other. They're kind of, that crew that's gotten to know each other for the most part. They all have their own jobs and their own duties on the ship. They're very different than us, though, because they're, a hive mind species. So they don't think of the individual as much as they think of the collective. Instead of, struggling with high numbers are very easy for them. Low numbers are very hard for them. So there were a lot of different elements of this that I wanted to tack, but just from like an anthropological perspective, I was really fascinated and inspired by what it would be like to spend time looking at humans through a completely different species perspective.
Okay, so how did you get involved in the anthology? What intrigued you about the alien horror?
Yeah, so John Durgin reached out to me and pitched the idea, and John Gage and I have known each other professionally for maybe about 2 years or so, and I don't tend to join anthologies and short story collections, and I tend to shy away from things that have deadlines because I'm not a deadline motivated person. I like to watch them fly by. I don't like to watch them fly by, actually. I hate to watch them fly by, but they tend to fly by because I'm a very slow writer. I do a lot of research. I take a lot of time to kind of get into the head and the perspective of my characters. So, that's how I got involved with it. But, working with John and Gage, I thought was going to be a really fun opportunity. Crystal Lake has been on my radar for years. I tend to do stuff myself. I run my own indie press that's just myself and my 8 books. And so I thought this was going to be a fun opportunity to stretch a little creative muscle, to work with some of their authors, to partner with Crystal Lake, and then to also, tackle a subject that I wanted to tackle, but didn't really have a story in mind on my own, catalog of work that was really hardcore sci-fi. And this allowed me to kind of lean into that.
Okay, so um, are you a big fan of writing sci-fi horror or sci-fi in general, or was this a new writing experience?
Yeah, this was a very new writing experience. I would say that I'm a fan of sci-fi in general. Horror, fantasy, and sci-fi to me are like my top three. I just love them and I read them all equally. But this was the first, I would say, story that's been from a different species perspective. A lot of my stories do contain elements of science fiction. I've got a techno thriller series called The Clearwater Conspiracies that leans into the science fiction of weaponizing astral projection and telepathy and things like that. It would be like, what if the government's MK Ultra experiments actually allowed them to, weaponize the mind? So there's always been this level of like techno thriller technology being used in a strange way that I've really liked. My novel Head Like a Hole kind of has a little bit of a sci-fi element to it as well. However, this was the first one that I really jumped both feet into the science fiction side, and it was a lot of fun.
And you went kind of classic sci-fi in a way too, with the grays and the alien abduction too. So that's interesting.
Yeah, yeah, I really, we all kind of grew up with the Greys, Roswell, all that kind of
Mm,
stuff. And so I wanted to go to something that was going to be a little bit familiar for the readers because I'm also going to do some things that are very unfamiliar with the readers. The Greys don't talk, so all their dialogue is telepathic. And the Greys are a pluralistic species. So numbers one, two, three are very difficult for them to conceptualize. But, number 982,412 is really simple for them and they can grasp that concept very easily. They're a trigender species as well, so their reproduction rituals involve three people rather than two. They have two hearts. Their spaceship is bioorganic. It's essentially a living bioengineered entity. So there were a lot of things that I wanted to go really far out with, but by setting them as grays, I kind of gave a little bit of familiarity to people who could kind of just sort of visualize what they were.
yeah, the ship sounds a little Farscape
Yes,
sneaking in there.
exactly. Yep. Yeah, definitely a little bit of Farscape in there.
Okay, so what do you think the genre of sci-fi lends itself naturally to horror?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think there's, if you have it near future or present tense, there's a lot of ways that technology, the science that is all around us can get warped and twisted. I mean, we could look at Jurassic Park and genetic engineering. That was science fiction 50 years ago. And now we just brought dire wolves back. Like we literally made dire wolves that haven't been around for, I think, 10,000 years. So there's all sorts of really fun stuff that you can do with science fiction set in the present day where it just sort of twists or warps the current technology that we have and it takes it in really fun and new speculative directions. And then for the further off, 10, 100, 1,000 years, that's where it gets really fun for me. Projects like Dune, which are just so incredibly imaginative, but also, butt up against fantasy and all those other things. So, yeah, I think, the trifecta of science fiction, horror, and fantasy, they just form this perfect, beautiful, triangle that can lend itself to each other in a lot of really fun and interesting ways.
Yeah, I think it's been going on for a while too. I mean, Star Wars came out in '77, and it's a blending of sci-fi and fantasy as well. And
Oh, yeah,
then you've got Event Horizon, which is basically a horror movie set in
absolutely.
space, and of
Yep.
course the classic Alien movies as well.
Exactly. I mean, Alien is almost just a slasher set on a, blue collar spaceship. And what's more freaky than something that shouldn't be on that spaceship, but's, systematically one by one taking out the members of your crew. And the more you think you understand it, the more you realize that like it's changing and you don't understand it. Small thing gets bigger. You cut the small thing, it has acid for blood, put something in your stomach. Every single thing surprises you about it. And that's what's so much fun about that movie and some of the sequels.
So when you were writing your novella, did you lean into the horror aspects more than the sci-fi, sci-fi more than horror, or did you kind of want to blend them together into a nice solid mix?
It's a great question. And I think my instinct was to start with the science fiction because I think that that's where the people are going to be expecting it when you have aliens. So really kind of ground the science fiction. For the aliens, this is all just normal. It's a routine, study of a human family, the way that we would, go to a farm and study some pigs. But as the horror element starts to kind of ramp up in the story, the aliens are surprised by this because it's an entity that they've never encountered before. And so that's where the story kind of starts going more towards horror, and the science fiction should kind of be, you should be comfortable with it by that point because you've spent some time seeing the world through the aliens' eyes. So I tried to balance them both. I would say it definitely leans more towards the science fiction side of it. It's science fiction 60%, horror 40%. But you to the aliens, it's horror the entire time because it's stuff that they're used to. They're used to walking around a spaceship that has flesh for walls and has organic lungs. They're used to all of this stuff that for us is absolutely fantastical and otherworldly.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea, is to take what would be a normal horror novel, people in their natural environment that suddenly get a horror element introduced, only in this case it's aliens in their natural environment. So that's an interesting twist on it. Yeah, I like
Thanks.
that.
Yeah, that's what really intrigued me about the story. The more I kind of followed it and played around with it and found the form was that it wasn't something that was horrific to us necessarily. It was something that was going to be horrific to the aliens. Just as if, a bunch of xenomorphs encountered, a human for the first time, they might not know what to make of it. It would be kind of something that would be shocking. Although I think the xenomorphs are a little bit more nasty than that. They probably would just put a face hugger on them and put a monster in their stomach as quick as they could.
Yeah, I think the xenomorphs kind of view the world as prey.
There's
No
something
matter
just to take and
yeah.
to help the species grow.
So, what's the one thing you think readers will enjoy most about your novella?
I think the imaginative nature of it is something that I really wanted to leave people with. Seeing our world through the eyes of another species was what intrigued me. I spend a lot of time with characters, kind of feeling out the world for every chapter I write. There's probably a chapter that I've written that gets discarded, but allows me to kind of understand the texture of the world through their perspective. And my hope is that this story is going to stand out on its own as a way to see humanity and see the universe, see things that we take for granted, our short, finite timeline compared to a species that can travel at near light speed, for a species that essentially is always dreaming. And that's how they create the world. That's how their technology is fueled. We only dream for, 20, 30, 40 minutes at night. And for them, it's everything that they do. They're waking dreamers. So a lot of those little things to me were really fun, ways to kind of play around with it. So I think the imaginative world would be something that, I'm hoping people will enjoy.
Sounds fun. So, what were some of the most difficult parts of writing the story? Did you get stuck on something when you were crafting the plot, or did a character give you trouble?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that kind of dovetails really well with the previous question. I think that thinking of our world through the perspective of a species that is connected to a hive mind, that is pluralistic, that is requires three people to procreate, that's very methodical in their approaches but also still emotional in a lot of ways as well. That to me was an incredible challenge. There's essentially three plots happening in my story, and they all intertwine and braid and kind of come to a conclusion together. So, lining up the events, getting the pieces on the board, and having them move in the proper ways was something that was the real challenge for me. And I'm a discovery writer. I plot, and then half the time I end up throwing out the outline because the characters find new and more interesting things than I could ever create once they're kind of doing their own thing. So for me, that was the real challenge of it, was really just letting the characters do their own thing, documenting it, kind of thinking, okay, does this work and does this not? And then once I trusted them enough, the mechanics of the storylines began to kind of intertwine and braid together in a way that if you start the story, you're going to say, okay, here's a plot, and here's a plot. I don't really know how they're coming together. But once you kind of get about a third of the way through, you're going to start to kind of see, okay, wow, these things are pinging off of each other. And then at that point, it becomes like, atoms bouncing around and creating, making new elements and everything. And that's where it's really fun for me.
Okay, so what were your most favorite parts of writing the story? Is there a scene or a character that stood out for you or you enjoyed writing?
Yeah, I would say that the part that I really enjoyed was the relationships between the characters, specifically the aliens on the spaceship. They all have, history together and they all work together and they all have shorthand. They all have people they trust and people they don't trust. And, like us in an office environment in any company where a bunch of people work together and spend a lot of time together, cliques form. People withhold information from each other. People guard that information. They put on different faces. And that to me was really the core of the story, was how these aliens worked with each other in the face of this problem. And then also how they had to work with the humans in order to solve this problem. The very people that they abducted, in a way, become the people that they need to trust and work with the most.
I'm curious, does this hive society have like a hierarchy?
They do, yes. Yeah, they have a hierarchy and there's hints of different parts of the organization. Absolutely. And there's, permission in order to procreate. There's permission in order to go back home and stay. So yeah, there's an absolute hierarchy in this society.
Hmm, interesting. So, what is it about horror in general that calls to you as a writer?
Yeah, that's another great question. And I ask myself that all the time. Why the hell do I spend so much time with things that scare me? Because a lot of horror is myself exploring the things that frighten me and the things that scare me. I've got a dental appointment on Monday and I hate the dentist. That can be its own form of horror. So, in a lot of ways, horror has always been a way to confront the things that scare me and the things that scare other people. It's been a way to kind of shine a flashlight in the dark cave of our fears. I always think back to being a kid and reading Stephen King's It. If the losers club can descend into the sewers of Derry and confront an interdimensional entity that wears the shape and the mask of a clown and has really been hunting people for thousands of years, if a group of kids can do that, then I think people who read horror can confront the monsters that they see every day. So horror gives us the hope to confront those monsters.
Yeah, I know I find when I'm writing about things I fear in real life, I have very little problem writing about it. It's like if I had to read that or watch that on TV, I would be scared
Yeah.
terribly.
Yeah.
But when
Absolutely.
writing about it, it gives me absolutely no problem. So,
Yeah, it's a
there's
way to get in the reps, to,
yeah.
swing away and to practice and to, to build up the strength and the resilience to face, the real problems in our
Mm.
society and in our life.
Okay, so what are you currently working on? What's next for you?
Wow. I wish I had a short answer for that question. I am always balancing like 3 to 5 projects at once.
Yeah.
So I'm currently writing the 3rd book in my Beyond the Lost Coast series. It's a cosmic horror meets coming of age series set in the Californian Lost Coast. And I'm on book 3, The Black Lantern, and I'm editing that right now. It's a big, chunky book. The previous book was a chunky book as well. I don't write, small books. I grew up on the Stephen King doorstoppers. So my books tend to be, 80 to 120,000 words. And let's see, I've got, a project that I can't really talk about. It's something that may work, it may not work. And then I'm working on a dark psychological kind of sexy thriller that I'm excited about, that has an element of the supernatural. So yeah, I got about 5 irons in the fire at the moment, trying to keep them all separate, but sometimes they intermingle a little.
Yeah, someone who has about a dozen works in progress currently active, I
Okay,
kind of
yeah.
understand that quite a
Yeah,
bit.
you feel it, right? And
Yeah.
the nice thing about that sometimes is if one of these projects doesn't work out, you can always kind of repurpose those parts for other projects and you learn and you get practice in. It's like sometimes you don't have the skill to tackle that book at this time in your career, but maybe you will be able to tackle it another few years down the line when you've developed those skills and you've got that toolbox with those, advanced, refined skills. But
Mhm.
it's mentally exhausting too.
Yeah, it is, but it also helps if you get stuck on one project, you can just go, "I'll just go work on this one now."
Exactly. Yeah. It's really nice too when they all kind of like, finish within a couple months of each other, and you have like a couple books that you can release. That's the ideal, is, you finish one and then you're polishing another, and then you've got the audiobook for a third, and then you've got a fourth, and that whole system works when it does.
Yeah,
It
I got
doesn't
I
always
got
work that
3
way for me.
projects working this year to finish up, so fingers
Nice.
crossed they all finish.
Yeah, yeah, fingers crossed for you.
Okay, so I think we'll wrap the interview up here, and I'd like to thank you for being a guest today. It was a pleasure chatting with you.
Yeah, it was a pleasure chatting with you. Thanks for having me.
Okay, and that's it for this episode, and bye for now.